Hi, I'm Alex, an 18-year-old trans guy from the UK. I medically transitioned through the Tavistock, who gave me blockers and testosterone. On the 4th of December 2020, I'd like to comment on the Keira Bell case. Keira Bell is a woman who thought she was a trans man, so she medically transitioned to be a man through the Tavistock, the NHS clinic that assesses and treats trans children. However, at the age of 23, she regrets transitioning, identifies as a woman, and started to detransition. She is suing the NHS and the Tavistock for letting her undergo treatment that she believes to be rushed and traumatic. She argues that she should have been told to wait and she should have been given more in-depth therapy before making this life-changing decision. She argues in court that children under the age of 18 don't have the emotional maturity to consent to hormone blockers, as they can't fully appreciate the risks and the fact that they tend to lead to hormone replacement therapy. The court ruled on the 1st of December 2020 in her favour that it is highly unlikely that children under the age of 13 can consent to hormone blockers, and it is doubtful that those aged 14 to 15 can understand and weigh the long-term risks and consequences. This judgment implies that going through the courts is the only way for under 16s to be prescribed puberty blockers. The Tavistock has immediately stopped processing new referrals, and many argue that this is a huge blow to trans rights. Firstly, I sympathise with Keira Bell's position in that I understand that wrongly transitioning is traumatic and her voice should be heard so this situation doesn't happen again. However, I believe she is spreading misinformation with regards to the nature of the assessment process, the risks of hormone blockers, and the consequences of preventing children from transitioning. Consent. Regarding the question of informed consent, I argue that a combination of the consent of the child, who is deemed to be Gillett competent, and the judgment of the clinical professionals involved is sufficient. During the rigorous assessment process, the child is assessed to see if they can understand the benefits and risks of this treatment, and the clinician is able to ascertain whether hormone blockers are in the child's best interests on the basis of therapy. Clinicians are very cautious in prescribing hormone blockers. The insinuation that the current system works on an affirmation model is deceitful, as, in the experience of many trans people, including myself, the clinicians are very critical of our claims. Therefore, a combination of the consent of a Gillett competent child and a judgment from a cautious clinical professional is sufficient to prescribe hormone blockers. Yes, the clinician may be wrong, but complete certainty is impossible, and just because a mistake is made, that doesn't mean that the consent wasn't valid. Furthermore, as I will outline, the consequences of wrongly prescribing hormone blockers are relatively minor, and complications can be found and mitigated as the patients are monitored extensively. Risks of blockers. As for the risks of hormone blockers, Keira Bell argues that being on blockers made her feel suicidal, and this was true in my case, but my suicidal feelings were spotted by my skilled Tavistock therapist, and I was prescribed a small add-back of estrogen that completely eliminated those feelings. I argue that blockers, like all medications, have side effects, but these side effects are easily spotted and managed through the extensive physical and psychological monitoring. A loss of fertility is also mentioned, but I consulted with fertility experts twice who assured me that going onto blockers or testosterone wouldn't halve my fertility, provided I was happy to come off testosterone when I needed to. Moreover, it's often argued that blockers are a gateway to cross-sex hormones, and the treatments and their effects are often conflated, but there is a separate, extensive and thorough consent process for hormone replacement therapy. For example, I had 5 years of therapy in the Tavistock in which the clinician could judge that testosterone was in my best interest before I was prescribed it, the only permanent part of my transition. The fact that many that take hormone blockers go on hormone replacement therapy suggests that the assessment process for blockers is accurate enough to include a high proportion of children that would benefit from a full medical transition. So, rather than going on blockers causing going on HRT, the type of people that go on blockers, trans people, are the type of people that go on HRT, and the assessment process is accurate enough to achieve this. Given this distinction between consenting for blockers and consenting for HRT, it should be emphasised that, to the best of our knowledge, the effects of blockers are only temporary, and consenting to them doesn't force you to stay on a medical pathway for the rest of your life. Risks of preventing transition. Crucially, the court's decision prevents trans children that are under 16 from being prescribed hormone blockers unless there is a court order. If the waiting times just to be seen by the Tavistock are currently 2 years, how long would it take a court to make this decision? The child's puberty would be over by then, having brought with it irreversible changes that cause agonising dysphoria. Keira Bell's comments indicate that she believes that those that are transgender can get through their dysphoria purely through therapy, but I can assure you that for many trans people like myself, there is no other option but to medically transition, as there is no other way to mitigate our dysphoria. This is indicated in the high suicide rates of trans people and the mental health crises of those that can't transition. Supporters of Keira Bell must be arguing that those devastating consequences, i.e. the consequences of preventing transition, are preferable to avoiding the possible risks of a reversible treatment, hormone blockers, because a very small proportion of those that take the treatment would not benefit from it. Conclusion. Keira Bell's case is an unfortunate one, but she is in the minority, as figures from Stonewall suggest that 0.09% of those that transition permanently detransition. More people, 0.4%, temporarily transition, but this may be due to a lack of social support through their transition, so transitioning may still be helpful to them. Keira Bell has projected her very uncommon experiences onto all gender dysphoric people, the vast majority of whom require transitioning as a life-saving treatment. She has been deceitful as to the nature of the assessment process, calling it an affirmation model and arguing that her beliefs weren't challenged. She has exaggerated the risks of hormone blockers, and the discussion has conflated them with HRT and its risks. And she doesn't seem to appreciate the devastating consequences of preventing children from transitioning, believing that because she didn't need to transition, we don't need to either. Thanks very much for watching until the end. I think there's a lot of misinformation in this case, so I'd really appreciate it if you could share it with as many people as possible. Thanks.